In recent months and years, one of the most consequential issues in higher education and foreign policy has come to the forefront: the role of foreign students on our campuses. For decades, the United States has welcomed international students primarily via the F1 student visa and J1 exchange visitor visa program, with the belief that these exchanges would foster goodwill, promote understanding, and strengthen America's place in the world. But today, the student visa system has become a test of whether America will defend its citizens, its values, and its sovereignty, or allow its openness to be exploited against itself. From the very beginning, the student visa system was understood as a privilege, not a right. F1 student visas and J1 exchange visas were intentionally classified as non-immigrant, exempting students from national quotas specifically because of their temporary status. State Department and DHS regulations and guidance explicitly state that a student visa is for the sole purpose of pursuing a full course of study, that a student's legal status is tied to the purpose of their entry, and that a student should not take any action that detracts from that purpose. This established a foundational bargain, a quid pro quo. America offers access to its unparalleled educational institutions, spreads its values back throughout the rest of the world, and in return, the student agrees to abide by our rules, focus on their studies, and contribute to an atmosphere of goodwill. This was believed to be occurring and to serve the national interest. But we know today that this bargain has too often been betrayed. A small but dangerous minority has twisted this privilege into a weapon, turning our campuses into stages for hostile political warfare, intimidation, and sometimes overt support for terrorist activities and organizations. Their presence and actions do not reflect America's soft power at work. These foreign students violate the conditions of their stay, transforming welcoming institutions into arenas of fear and division. For years, policymakers argued that foreign tuition dollars would subsidize the education of American students. But what kind of trade is it when those dollars come at the cost of our fellow citizens' safety? Universities that prioritize revenue from abroad over the dignity of their own students have lost sight of their purpose. The conflict here is not between the US government and international students. It is really a conflict between the rights of American students and institutions that are captured financially and ideologically by foreign influence. At the heart of this debate lies a simple but profound truth. Our universities exist first and foremost to serve young Americans by preparing them to be self-actualized, self-sufficient, and able participants in our national and global economy, as well as good citizens of our nation who uphold our core values. They're owed an educational environment free from harassment, violence, and intimidation. But too often, shamefully, their interests have been ignored. American students should not have to fear for their safety or dignity in their own schools. But that's what's happened. They've been forced to hide in libraries, barricaded against hostile mobs, as happened at Cooper Union in New York. They've endured chants of intifada, a reference to terror attacks that killed over 1,000 citizens of our ally Israel, as well as our own citizens, and from the river to the sea, known to be rooted in the eliminationist Arabic phrase, from water to water, Palestine is Arab, as in Arab only. All organized by groups that explicitly, literally call for, quote, the destruction of Western civilization, unquote. In exchange for American students' tuition dollars, American students have been forced to watch their own administrators coddle agitators by serving them burritos during building takeovers, as happened at Harvard, by offering to negotiate with them, as happened at Columbia and at many other universities, instead of defending their American students who simply wanted to study in peace. We need to be clear about what we do not want. We do not want foreign nationals using student visas as cover for political warfare against America. We do not want the theft of American intellectual property by those who support our adversaries. We don't want anti-Semitism imported from abroad to terrorize American Jews. We don't want foreign guests to alter American foreign policy on American soil, particularly not when that foreign policy existed before those guests arrived, and often before those guests were even born. We don't want our universities financially dependent on hostile governments, and we must not allow for an immigration system that is blind to ideology. In much of the conversation about what's gone on our campuses in recent years and the Trump administration's efforts to review our student visa system, much has been said about whether the administration's actions constitute infringement on free speech. And much has been said about whether the administration's efforts should be strictly limited to conduct as opposed to speech. But speech is conduct. Speech is conduct when it creates hostile environments that drive Americans into silence and fear. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 makes it unlawful for colleges and universities that receive federal funds to be deliberately indifferent to hostile environment harassment, including when that conduct is only speech. Just as universities must be punished for violating Title VI through their deliberate indifference to hostile environment harassment, foreign guests must be removed from the country when they perpetrate it. That's not McCarthyism. That's not an undermining of the First Amendment. That is the law. That is what our civil rights laws necessarily demand if those laws are to have any meaning or effect. That is also what the Immigration and Nationality Act's criteria for inadmissibility and deportability explicitly require, including its explicit provisions barring from admissibility or requiring deportation of not only those who provide material support for terrorism, but also explicitly barring those who express or espouse support for terrorist activities or organizations, and those whose presence would be detrimental to the interests of the United States as determined by the Secretary of State. In recent months, we've seen DHS and the State Department initiate efforts to review and potentially decertify schools' eligibility to host foreign students via the Student and Exchange Visa Program, SEVP. Congress created SEVP after 9/11, along with its corresponding information system, SEVIS, to track foreign students because one of the hijackers who turned an American plane into a missile that smashed into the Pentagon and murdered our fellow citizens had entered the United States on a student visa and apparently did not even bother to attend class. The law places clear, non-negotiable reporting duties on every single university certified to accept foreign students. They're required to report when a student fails to enroll, drops below a full course load, or is subject to disciplinary action. Yet for decades, the SEVP system has been underused. Schools relax in reporting or updating data, and DHS often refrained from enforcement. In fact, under the Obama administration in 2011, a memo was issued by DHS stating that schools were designated as sensitive locations, not meaning that schools were places where there should be additional scrutiny, but rather stating that schools were now locations where DHS activity required a higher standard, required approvals from senior agency officials, and required limited and discrete activity by enforcement agents, essentially turning our campuses into mini sanctuary cities. The cases of a few high-profile would-be deportees in the past few months, namely Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsin Madawi at Columbia University, as well as Mamadou Tall at Cornell, show what is at stake. None of them were innocent scholars merely silent for unpopular opinions. They were activists whose conduct crossed clear lines. They and the campus organizations they led engaged in occupations of campus buildings in violation of university rules, explicitly endorsed violence, distributed materials with logos and iconography of foreign terrorist organizations. In Mahmoud Khalil's case, he also failed to disclose required information about his work history and background on his 2024 green card application. Mohsin Madawi, also at Columbia, allegedly made statements at gun shows and shops about killing Jews. And Tal, who later self-deported while being pursued for deportation, had been subject to disciplinary proceedings at Cornell's campus and had a social media history explicitly and repeatedly labeling the United States as evil and calling for its destruction. The government's actions against them, visa revocations, detention, removal proceedings, none of these violated due process, and all of them demonstrate the principle that the privilege of a visa ends when that privilege is abused. Courts may debate the limits, and in the case of Madawi and Khalil, they continue to, but the Trump administration clearly has drawn a line. America will not harbor foreign nationals who turn its campuses into proxy battlefields for foreign wars, or who try to turn its campuses into places where American students learn to hate themselves and their country. Thankfully, under the Trump administration, particularly thanks to Secretary Rubio and Secretary Noem, the law is now being applied as intended and as written. Just last week, DHS initiated efforts to replace the presumptive validity of a student visa for the so-called duration of stay, an amorphous and arguably open-ended status, with a validity only until a date certain, requiring renewal of a visa in order to remain lawfully present thereafter. One could ask why this was not already the case. And in fact, at one point it was, and then we adopted the duration of stay approach. It looks like now we'll be finally going back to issuing student visas only for a defined period of time, as it should have been all along. The State Department is implementing enhanced vetting for student visa applicants, including the use of artificial intelligence to scan social media for signs of terrorist sympathies, and requiring that applicants have their social media accounts set public when they are applying for visas. This year, the State Department's efforts have led to the revocation of roughly 6,000 student visas, 4,000 of whom were for individuals who had committed criminal acts, and hundreds of whom were individuals whose actions constituted support for terrorist organizations. But more must and can be done. At DHS, the Office of Partnership and Engagement can forge active, continuous security partnerships with universities, provide materials that they require universities to provide to foreign students, and detail the INA's provisions and full scope of reportable conduct under SEVP guidance to foreign students. DHS can, and I think should, revive and reconstitute its Homeland Security Academic Partnership Council and its Foreign Malign Influence Subcommittee, which actually exists, believe it or not, but appears to have done next to nothing in the past administration, and can potentially turn it from an advisory committee of university officials into the agency's means of centralizing, systematizing, and operationalizing its compliance with President Trump's executive orders relating to foreign students and universities' compliance with immigration law. DHS, which has done excellent work at our southern border and which is recruiting thousands of new agents to continue and scale up that work, critically should do the same regarding SEVP field representatives, who serve as liaisons between DHS and SEVP certified schools. Today, there are only 60 SEVP field representatives for the entire country, 20 for each of 3 regional groups, Eastern, Central, and Western, a paltry number given that there are over 1 million foreign students in the United States. The State Department can update its closely held technical alert lists and list of critical fields of study, triggering a pause in the processing of student visa applications and heightened reviews of applicants' backgrounds when their intended course of study or area of research matches one of the areas on that technical alert list or critical field of study list. Both DHS and state can better monitor when admitted foreign students change their academic majors and concentrations or fail to complete their studies on time. Both agencies can also explore requiring universities to provide names of students, foreign students, who they have admitted, not only after those students have accepted offers of admission, but when they are first admitted, regardless of whether they have yet accepted offers, to enable both DHS and state to vet them earlier. Both agencies can also explore implementing early formal deadlines for providing such names many months in advance of foreign visitors' intended arrivals on student visas. And universities must also do their part. They should actively educate international students through international students' offices about the totality of what the Immigration and Nationality Act and SEVP regulations state and require, and enforce their own codes of conduct. And foreign students themselves should be required to attest in writing upon applying for student visas, as well as upon arrival in the United States and periodically thereafter, that they understand our laws and will abide by them, and that they have not violated any of them. Foreign students unwilling to make such a pledge on an ongoing basis have no place here. The Trump administration's efforts are not only about policy, they're also about the very purpose of American education. American universities should be places of reasoned debate, free inquiry, and civic virtue. Instead, too many have become incubators of illiberal ideologies imported from abroad. This is about American values, rejecting bigotry, defending pluralism, and upholding our constitutional republic. This is about American foreign policy, asserting that non-citizen guests cannot dictate our alliances or undermine our sovereignty. And this is about the conduct of all students, ensuring that foreign malign influence does not corrupt young Americans into extremist movements. The Trump administration's efforts are also about the social contract among citizens more broadly. We tolerate differences, even offensive ones, from our fellow Americans because they are part of our family. But that contract does not extend to foreign nationals. The American people never agreed to suffer the indignity of being demeaned, harassed, assaulted, or effectively displaced from and excluded from our own universities and communities by guests who demonstrate contempt for our nation, our allies, and our values. That is not part of the American social contract. That is not in the national interest, and that must not be tolerated. Under this administration, it will not be tolerated. America's openness must not allow for the entry of hostile Trojan horses. By remembering the original bargain intended in our student visa system, enforcing our immigration laws relating to foreign students, and making the programs that implement those laws more robust and better staffed, we can ensure that our universities once again serve their highest purpose: to educate American citizens, to enrich our society, and to safeguard the values that make America worth defending. Thank you.